Welcome back to the program. And as we start off, we're contributing to the continuing debate on what would be the ideal minimum wage. Labor and the government seem to be in a tango for a while, but Labor has withdrawn from that tango now. Where does it all lead? What's the ideal minimum wage that would cater to the needs of Nigerian workers? And the president rather keys into a living wage in line with the ILO. So what's ideal as a living wage? Joining us to have that conversation, we have the Director General of the Michael Imodu, National Institute for Labor Studies, Comrade Isarem, who joins us. He joins us via Zoom from Ilorin. Good morning, sir, and welcome to the program.
Yeah, good morning, Bukola. And through you, I say good morning to Kayode and Geoffrey.
Yes, sir.
I think three of you deserve your minimum to every morning.
Thank you very much, sir, for the vote of confidence. And also joining us is Dr. Emeka Okengu, who joins a development economist and chief executive officer, Anthill Concepts Limited, who joins us from our Abuja studio. Good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning, Bukola, the rest of the team in Lagos.
Indeed, nice to have you, sir. So I'm going to start with you, Comrade, from Ilorin. Before we get into what is ideal, perhaps we should look into the thinking of government, which is proposing 48,000 naira, but against the backdrop of what would seem to be the facts of the matter in terms of revenue, starting from what is generated domestically. We look at the FIRS, it surpassed its target in 2023 alone by 107%. And in the first quarter of the year, it has also surpassed its target. The subnationals are also getting increased allocation from what we're seeing. And if you look at what seems to be the mainstay of the economy, which is crude oil, the benchmark for the 2024 budget is $77, but crude oil is hovering between $79 and $83 per barrel. So there are extra earnings in that regard. So Labour is talking about a marked disparity between what government is proposing and the current economic realities. Why is government proposing what many have agreed is a no-no and is well below what is even cumulative if you add the wage award that government agreed with Labour amid the removal of fuel subsidy? So why is government proposing 48,000 naira against the backdrop of these facts? Comrade, I'm starting with you first.
Yeah, Bukola, I hope I can comprehend your question because I have some one or two interruptions from my end here. But I think the point I quickly want to raise is that this is the sixth national minimum wage negotiation that is taking place in Nigeria. The sixth. We started in 1981, then later on there was a review in 1990, then year 2000, 2010, of course, 2018. So essentially, this is the sixth national minimum wage negotiation. So we have a very rich tradition of negotiating for national minimum wage. So to that extent, I think what is currently happening is not really surprising. It has been the same road that has been traversed before. The principle of national minimum wage is that it is the least pay legally, backed up by law, below which no worker will earn. Of course, employers can pay more than the national minimum wage, but no worker, especially in establishment that employs up to 50 workers, we earn less than national legally permissible minimum wage. And the most important highlight of the negotiation process is that it's tripartite. That means it's made up of governments, in this case, federal government, and state governments. Interestingly, in this new current negotiation, 6 governors are participating to reflect the geopolitical zones. Of course, you have the organized labor, ably represented by Nigeria Labour Congress, and of course, the Trade Union Congress. Of course, you now have the Nigeria Employer Consultative Association, NECA, which represents the private sector employers. So, point blank, in responding to your question about what the government is thinking, I think for us to have meaningful discussion of national minimum wage negotiation, we should have a tripartite perspective, because it's not a wage award. Nobody will give anything. It is what is negotiated. And I think it's better that we weigh the perspective, the thinking of all the key actors in this respect. Of course, the parameters are clear. We have to look at the conditions of the working men and women like you, like other millions of workers in Nigeria. And I think it's already established now that the existing prevailing minimum wage, cannot make a worker to survive. The rate of inflation is clear, devaluation of the currency, high cost of living in general. I think there's a consensus on that. And this has been well articulated by the organized labor. And I'm happy that we're having the discussion. In fact, it's nice for us to treat compensation, workers' pay, as one of those microeconomic issues that we normally discuss routinely. Inflation, capacity utilization. Often we forget that you can't drive any economy without a well-paid workforce. And the way you do that is to make sure that you increase their pay. Minimum pay is part of it. So what I would want to say quickly as my opening remark is that all the stakeholders must draw on the rich tradition that have been established over the years since 1981, which is that we look at the economic parameters, the state of the economy, the plight of the workers who are demanding for this pay, and I think there's a consensus on that this minimum wage cannot endure. And I think I'm happy all the parties have also agreed on that. Then we look at affordability. We also look at level of productivity for sustainability of pay. Because it's not just for you to earn the salary, you must also make sure that you protect jobs. Don't forget that in the private sector, employers there can only pay based on their capacity to produce and ability to also sustain the enterprise. So, but I have no doubt in my mind that in spite of what has happened, including the protests by labor, and I understand the concern of labor, there's a complete gap between the demand of labor proposal and the offer that's been given by the government. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But proposal is different from agreement. I also understand the fact that they work out, and I just listened to the president of NSC, Ajeru, just now from your clip, that it's not that they are not coming back. On the contrary, they've called on the government to go back to drawing board and have another proposal to come in place. But on the whole, I think we are making some progress because first, federal government under President Bola Ahmed Tinubu is very clear on the need for improvement on minimum wage. In fact, the president talk of living wage, and it is against that background that he constituted the tripartite minimum wage committee, which is the most expansive in recent time, 37 members committee.
All right. Let's take it to Dr. Okengu now. Pardon me. Let's take it to Dr. Okengu so that we can manage our time. Do you agree that a proposal is not an agreement, as the comrade has said, and really more importantly, is that the best that government can afford against the backdrop of what it's earning domestically and from the international trade?
Thank you very much, Nicola. The question will be, is that the best a nation should be seeing now in this time and state, when everybody agrees that we're way past the levels of talking about minimum wage? We should be talking about living wages. And if we're talking about living wage, and like the comrade has said, he had mentioned, in very clear terms, that jobs needs to be protected. And he talked about productivity. So I thought that for the first time, or maybe get something new to the table, let's begin to talk about something a little bit more inclusive, something a little bit more innovative. Because in looking at labor and minimum wage, also remember that belting wages is a very major factor in inflation. So it is just not for you to say, pay everybody 400 million, pay everybody 40,000, but there has to be, a clear understanding of the values therein contained. So I thought for me that what I should be seeing with labor, having grown, the way it has, was some deeper thinking. Also now coming to government to say Nigeria belongs to all of us, instead of us now talking about wage increment as it were now, or minimum wage, we should be talking about how we're going to be expanding, the productivity space. Remembering that a lot of these people who are also in labor, are representing even industries that are more or less moribund. Some of them are from the textile, sectors that are no longer functioning. Some of them are from the manufacturing sector that's a lot that are closing down. So if what I thought, taking it from the perspective of somebody who has interest in development, was to say what we should be bringing to the table will be all the indices that should be able to make it clear to all stakeholders that this is the best for our country. And that will be what you have already mentioned. I don't need to go back to it again. Transportation, rent, medicals, and all, which were the basis of salary calculations way back in the days. So for people to wake up in the morning and say, oh, because things are not too bad or things are not too good, you're going to be paying every Nigerian worker a minimum. Somebody had talked about 615,000. Another person says 105,000. And so forth and so on. So yes, it is important that workers are well paid, because every worker deserves his wages. All of us ultimately are workers. But in also doing so, we need to also take into consideration that in taking the wrong wage decisions, you can actually bleed the country to death.
Let me stay with you on this particular issue, how Labour approached the table, which is perhaps one of the reasons why Labour had to walk out, because the government, according to what we know or understand, appear not to have broken down how they arrived at 48,000. But Labour was quite empirical in how they got to the table, which I want you to speak to. They considered a family of six, that if you have a family of six and you can't live with less than $2 a day, so $12 per family. And then if you multiply that by 30 days, that's $360 per month. And then they began to break it down to what they consider cost of living index, covering housing, education, feeding, transportation, gas, kerosene, electricity, basic Medicare, clothing, and created room for inflation. They came with data for everybody to speak to and say, okay, this is what we are proposing. But it appears the government did not come with any form of empirical. We were not in the room, but that appears to be the understanding.
We should have actually brought, innovation onto the table too. And this is where you now begin to now look inwards. I mean, in this your show, a little while ago, I thought I heard that the reps were trying to, initiate a process where rent will now be regulated. I mean, you can't meet everybody's needs. That's not even possible. Okay, just like in your own case, where you work, your office is not able to meet all your needs. Now, yes, times are hard, but those times that are hard now calls for you to begin to now look for innovative ways of expanding, okay, your prosperity pathways, or your productivity. This is what I'm trying to struggle to put across. Now, we have a lot of innovations around the country that can create a lot of new economic pathways for us. We are getting more money, but are we expanding the manufacturing space? Okay, the more income seems to be coming from taxation, but are we not getting it, from direct manufacturing? Are we expanding, those areas? Are we creating new economic prosperity pathways that can be able to take in more people? That's the point. I mean, yes, globally, because of so many global disruptions, the COVID crisis, climate change, things are getting out of tangent. But what are these adaptation and mitigation measures that we're bringing onto the table? That's my point. Okay, so if you're saying, yes, every person requires 100,000 to be able to move from point A to point B, that will be right. But in that state, now what alternatives are we bringing to the table to be able to push on it?
Dr.
Like I
Kengo, if
said
I'm a
to you,
button, sir, if I'm a button, I think my question is, data came with, labor came with data. What is the basis of government's 48,000? At least let's hear them out. How did they get there? So that, because when you're negotiating, you need to put all the data on the table. We haven't heard what government is. I just read to you what labor brought to the table.
Yes. So you should send the question, to the government representative. I don't work for government. I'm not speaking for government. So it's not for me to answer because, like you, I wasn't in the room either. So if anybody has that information, then we can begin to churn it. We're not going to be assuming or presuming what we're not very certain of. If government says 48%, that is for government to be able to, provide proof or support why they're proposing 48%. I am not the government spokesman. I don't represent government on your show. So we need to throw that question at the person who should be able to give us the right answers, and that won't be me.
Okay, Dr. Kengo, the reason, because we have invited government has not shown up, and I spoke to these numbers and this empirical figure because you said, I think labor also should be reasonable, be innovative, and all of that. So, but we've invited government. We are hoping that they will show up someday, but as we speak, they are not here. Kairi.
Great.
Let me take this to Comrade Saremo, because while this is ongoing, there are people out there, workers, government workers, even private sector workers who need that wage increase because they go to the market and what they have currently cannot afford much. So I'm concerned about what looks like grandstanding. Should we really be employing all of these negotiation tactics? I'm going to start from the extreme, then I will give you extreme, then we'll meet halfway while people's lives are at stake. Shouldn't there be some sort of speed here, comrade?
Well, Khalid,
Please go ahead, comrade.
this part of collective bargaining process. But what is possibly unusual is that we are in an interesting time in which we have serious economic crisis. Now, if you negotiate in the period of adversity, in the period of crisis of living, as we have now, the crisis of working, and also even the revenue crisis accrued to government, the crisis of production in the case of private sector, the crisis of, the challenges facing businesses. In fact, also a crisis of unemployment, which you have to do that because minimum wage should be paid to only workers that are working. I mean, we also have to know that those of us who are working, we are relatively better than those who are unemployed. So now, if we are negotiating the conditions of crisis as we are now, there will be a lot of pressures on all the stakeholders. And I understand the concern of my comrades. I mean, you can't beat the breakdown of the NSC and TUC as they analyze it very well. I mean, certainly workers can do more with more pay. Again, government is also clear about the need to improve the workers' pay. I mean, nobody has said no, but you also know the few challenges of revenue. Even though we've seen some significant improvement, the federal revenue arising from the reallocation of resources that have gone to one product, petroleum product subsidy, now go to federal allocation. But you also know there are state governments, there are local governments, even though they have gotten more revenue, they also have challenges of development. So what I'm trying to say here is that nothing will come out as national minimum wage unless it's negotiated. And it has to be shared perspective that we must carry on together. It's not a zero-sum game, it is a win-win game, and that can only come through the process of negotiation. And Kayode says, so this is the sixth cycle that we are running, even though we are behind schedule. Ideally, the current minimum wage has elapsed, since April. We ought to have done this much more earlier, but better late than never. So all I'm trying to say in reality is that all the three parties have to now come together, and that now comes to the issue of appropriate negotiation in good faith. And I know that in my mind that federal government will have to go, or government will have to go back to the drawing board. Of course, Labour too will have to also come, to also appreciate issues beyond the needs of their members, which I share very well. We also have to think of affordability, the ability to pay off employers, and I know Labour is interested to have a minimum wage rate that can defend jobs, not the one that lead to job losses. But the bottom line, and I think this is a very, very important point, is to recognize what are we negotiating on is national minimum wage. Minimum wage is the lowest, below which no worker will earn, and is the only wage that is backed up by law. And we can look at the numbers. In year 2000, the legally permissible minimum wage was 5,500. Due to the efforts of organized labor, negotiation took place, and it moved to 18,000. Then later on, 2018, it moved to current 30,000. So you can see the movement legally permissible. But even this legally permissible, you can check it out. Most workers are already earning more than that. That is clear. Those are the objective factors we need to look at. The average in the public service, close to most workers, minimum pay is about 45,000.
Right.
Some state governments have also jacked up minimum wage beyond the national minimum. So, which means it is just for those workers who are much more vulnerable, but it's put in the law to make sure that no worker has less than that. And the reason why it is also important to underscore this point is that it is the only pay if you employ more than 50 workers. You don't pay minimum wage, you can also be sanctioned legally. There are sanctions.
Well, comrade, quickly, let me come in here. You've made a very vital point, and because we're trying to think out of the box as well, let me go to Dr. Okengo and quickly get his point in, because I know you've also worked on the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, and SDG goal, the SDG 8, that's called 8, decent work, economic growth. That's what we're trying to approach. But from all projections, Nigeria looks like we're going to be missing the target to achieve SDGs, and this is for the doctor in our Abuja studio. So from what the comrade is saying, Comrade Saremu, so should we then look for a way to then make sure that this minimum wage increase is just targeted at the most vulnerable in our workforce? If the governments are saying we can't take all this huge burden if we do it across board, can thinking out of the box mean targeting those who are most vulnerable and saying this will be for these set of people and will increase it considerably? Is that a way out as well?
No, thinking out of those, Kayode, would be to create new economic prosperity pathways. And I can tell you this for free. There are a lot of agencies in Nigeria. I can mention one. There's just been this man who's been made acting DG of an agency, I think in the last 1 month, Raw Materials Research and Development Council. And maybe you should try to bring him on your show. And in 1 month of his assuming office, he has unveiled 46 patents that is supporting almost every sector of Nigeria. This agency has built a modular refinery. They have extracted phytos, for the treatment of diabetes and tuberculosis. They have done scrubbers, that can calcinate lime for gypsum and all that to support the paint industries. All they need is to now scale it up to commercialization. Now, this is just a guy who is 1 month in office. And there are so many, many other agencies like this. So what we need to do is that those people you call vulnerable, might just be, that willing workforce that needs to be engaged. And all they need is that if you are able to now put together these prosperity pathways. And I gave you a typical example with our textile industries. As against, the popular cotton, yarn, lint, we're going towards non-woven now. A lot of textile industries around the world are now running around the non-woven fabrics, which is made out of petrochemicals. Now, imagine if you also now had, research and innovation supporting such things, so that you just don't talk about, the vulnerable persons. I mean, you're not vulnerable when you have your hand and feet. You're vulnerable when you are, unwell, when you are disabled, et al. But when you have all your whole parts together and all you're looking for is that opportunity that you're not getting, then that is just, premeditated vulnerability, okay, or artificial vulnerability, if you may. Point I'm trying to make, Kayode, is that this is a country that has so much we can be able to gain from and expand the scope, and more people can get jobs and then earn living wages and not minimum wage. If we had our industries, growing back again, I'll give a typical example with Israel. Today Israel is one of the, it's a technological giant, by just, focusing on its startups. As I speak to you today, Israel has over 6,000 startups in practically everything you can mention. So point I'm trying to make is that yes, it's good for everybody to earn well and live well, okay, but it's also good for us to look at productivity and expanding that space as the basis, of us now deciding who is vulnerable and who is most vulnerable.
And it's a refreshing way to look at it if you consider that, the idea of the living wage should not just be targeted at the workers in the organized public sector, but also workers in the informal sector as well. Now, as we begin to reflect on what will be the ideal living wage, I'm coming to you now, comrade. The public perception about what Labour is proposing is that, it's a bit highfalutin, it's not realistic. But if you consider also that with the opinion that that would elicit inflation, another round of inflation. Some have said that that's a myth, really, but that the idea of a living wage is to enhance productivity in the private, in both the public and private sectors. So, comrade, I'd like you to reflect on those 2 points as you also propose what would be the ideal living wage within the context of our current economic realities.
Well, Bukola, I think the ideal national minimum wage is the one that is negotiated through the process of collective bargaining. Is the one that passes through the process of compromises. That is one that is based on the plight of the workers, that addresses the issue of sustainability, profitability, ability to pay off enterprises. Because don't forget, as I've said, it's a tripartite agreement. But the only way we will have wise outcome is for each of the parties to think of each other as concerned. For instance, let me start with the government. Government must realize, and I think this government has realized, that there is virtual collapse of wages, minimum wage, as we have it today. Inflation is double digits, it goes better. I think the latest figure is about 38 or thereabout. High cost of living and food inflation component is the most prohibitive. So high cost of transportation, of rent. So workers are going through serious crisis. So if we talk of ease of business, we should be talking of ease of working. And the ease of working can only take place if workers are well remunerated very well. And I think government seems to be clear on that. Now, organized labor must also think in terms of the thinking of the employers as well as government, to know that in the private sector, for them, wage payment is an item of cost. Now, what cost can you put on the employers in private sector, given what they're already going on, the challenges of electricity, of high cost of doing businesses? Now, what can you put on them so that they can be jobs? So I've no doubt in my mind that parties come back to negotiation, and as soon as possible, trade the numbers.
All right, comrade.
But as I've said, minimum wage is minimum. You can, all the parties can now continue later after the national minimum wage to engage in negotiation for living wage, which can be done at sectoral level. But minimum wage should be the one backed up by law that is enforceable, that employers can pay, and the one that will be paid will not lead to more job losses, especially for the vulnerable employers and vulnerable employees. And I've no doubt in my mind that it has been done with previous negotiation. There will be wise outcome out of this negotiation. But on the whole, it's very healthy what is taking place. We are celebrating democracy, constitutionalism, all minimum wage.
Good morning. Good to see you.
Taking place in a democracy, because we have freedom of association, freedom to negotiate, and I think all the parties should take advantage of this new round of negotiation so that we can improve on minimum wage. In fact, in UK, we don't have the dramatized 5-year cycle. You have a commission that adjusts wages. I was just checking the record now. Minimum wage just moved from £14 per hour in UK from £10 per hour to £14 this year. They have a commission that adjusts it, and that will now impact on across the board in terms of consequential adjustment for other workers that have been paid. I think this is the way Nigeria should go. At the end of this negotiation, I will be happy that we do this more periodically. This dramatized one. The other
minimum wage, according to you, is what is negotiated, but it could be well below what Labour is expecting. That's why I wanted you to put a specific figure to it. I'd like you to also react to it, Dr. Okengu, by giving us what you think the ideal minimum wage is. But there's a reaction that I want to take from some of our one of our viewers. EK Kirian says, my worry with Labour is that their proposal of 615k minimum wage was made with the assumption that the earner will have a family of 6. My understanding is that the earners should be those who just started working. So how can someone who just started working, most likely fresh school leaver, have a family of 6? The probability of having such a situation is minimal. So, Dr. Okengu, as we wind down, your thoughts on what would be ideal, and perhaps you also react to what this viewer has said.
Well, I think the viewer has hit the nail. What's important, I also think you mentioned it in the course of your deliverables. What is important is that we know that belting, costs, which is where you have wages, is a major trigger for inflation. It's important that sinks. Okay, so when you're talking about minimum wage, also know that a lot of the negotiations are done on behalf of government and not the private sector. And it is the private sector and SBAs that have more people in employment, more than government. If cumulatively, probably 1 million or less, in the whole of the government circles are the subnationals and the national. So it's important that in doing this thing, you also now check income. We need to also check productivity, input and output of even the person. And then the receivables of this person who is supposed to be paying this minimum wage. If we are, Comrade had mentioned, UK that has developed, world-class infrastructure that can be able to support these things. Do we have that base infrastructure to begin to, phantom minimum wage? And then even if I mentioned 50,000, how many people are able to pay, their gatesmen or drivers that amount of money on a sustainable basis? What are they also, getting? So point I'm trying to make is that, yes, we must be able to be very open and inclusive about this. Let's look at all the indicators, all the indices, all the challenges, all the prospects, all the threats and all the opportunities. And then we'll put them together and then get some, policy support. I think the policy support instruments can also now support, the finances that we're getting. If we're able to get programs that can be able to, support reduction of rent, support reduction of school fees, support other social services that now, are very demanding of what it is we aim, it might be able to help us, in creating a pathway that works for everybody, both government, private sector, and of course, the wage earners themselves.
We hope that at the end of the day, Labour will smile to the bank, as well as workers in the informal sector as well. We must drop the anchor on this bit of the conversation at this point. And thank you very much, sirs, for your time on the program. Comrade Issa Aremu, Director General, Michael Imodu, National Institute for Labour Studies. Thank you for your time and contribution on the program.
Thank you, Bukola.
And Dr. Emeka Okengo, Development Economist and Chief Executive Officer, Anthill Concepts Limited. Thank you for joining us on the program.
Pleasure. It was good to be here.